Yom Teruah. At the beginning of this evening, I asked the question, why do we observe Yom Teruah? The simple answer is because in Leviticus chapter 23, we are told that Israel was commanded to observe this day as an appointment with Yahweh. But what is the full significance of this appointment with Yahweh? As we saw earlier, it is the fifth of the 7 Moedim, called in Vayikra, or Leviticus chapter 23. So, what are the names of the other 6 Moedim that are also commanded to be observed in that chapter? The 7 Moedim are called Pesach, the week of Matzah, Bikurim, Shavuot, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Each of those 7 Moedim are all appointments with Yahweh, and each one is a holy convocation, or a day of communal assembly. That is, apart from Bikurim, which is a moed, but it is not a holy convocation. However, as Bikurim always occurs during the week of Matzah, we have a holy convocation on both the 1st and the 7th days of the week. Now, the celebration of the Moedim is also a uniform structure, with all 7 events spread throughout the first 7 months of each year. Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim are grouped together in the first calendar month of Aviv. Then, early in summer, Shavuot stands alone, with a long gap until the latter 3 Moedim, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, which all, of course, occur in the 7th month. Having determined the names and the timing of each of those moed, I want to now consider briefly the significance of each of those moed, because it's only by looking at them, each one separately, we can determine why we, as Talmidim of Yeshua, desire to observe each of those moedim, just as ordained by Yahweh. So by looking at the significance of each moed, we will see how the sovereign plan of Yahweh has progressed and developed over a long period of time. And it'll also help us to realize the full significance of each of those moed. Is not fully understood through the words of Vayikra Chapter 23 alone. So now, when Israel crossed the Yarden River, the Jordan, and inherited the land that Yahweh had promised to Abraham, the words of Leviticus chapter 23 were already formed part of the Torah. But even though they had been given those words, they did not fully appreciate what those words meant. By considering how Israel have always understood the words of Vayikra, we begin to appreciate why that without knowing Yeshua as their Mashiach, some of the words in that chapter still remain a mystery. Now, starting with Pesach, the first of the moed, we're told in Torah that it was always to be a remembrance of their departure from Egypt. Then, during the first week of their journey, they ate only matzah, the unleavened bread, being their staple diet while they marched through the Red Sea and out into the wilderness. Therefore, the week of matzah is the second moed, and is an annual reminder of the haste in which they left Egypt. Then, during the first week of their journey, Israel passed through the Red Sea, which became the turning point of their journey. As they looked upon the Egyptians washed up on the seashore, they finally broke from their old lifestyle of slavery and began a new life under the kingship of Yahweh. Their passage through the Red Sea should be marked as the observance of Bikurim, or the third moed, which during the Levitical era, that's the period from the Exodus to the destruction of the first temple, always fell on the same day, a day after the weekly Shabbat in the midst of the week of Matzah. And it was always the 18th day of Aviv. But instead, the rabbis selected the 16th day of Aviv, which is the second day of Matzah. Following the week of Matzah, Yahweh, of course, on their journey, gave them man from heaven, which sustained them right through until the day after that first Pesach in Eretz Israel, is when they went out and gleaned the wild barley, and the man ceased to fall from heaven from that day onward. Now the timing of Bikurim is important because it also starts the count of the Omer, which lasts for 50 days until Shavuot, the fourth Moed. Shavuot is remembered by all Israel as the day on which they received the 10 words that Yahweh spoke to the people from the top of Mount Erev, or Sinai. Then, at the end of the summer months, comes, of course, Yom Teruah, the first day of the 7th month, the day of shouting and blasts on the shofar, as we've already read in Leviticus 23, 24 and 25. He said to the people, in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, is to be for you a day of complete rest for remembering, a holy convocation announced with blasts on the shofar. Do not do any kind of ordinary work, and bring an offering made by fire for Yahweh. As stated, the 5th Moed is to be a day of remembering. But the verse does not tell us what Israel was supposed to remember. So, I will come back to this point and consider that command in more detail shortly. So moving on, we come to the 6th Moed, which of course is Yom Kippur. And immediately after the death of Aaron's 2 elder sons in the Mishkan, Yahweh made a new ruling that no one was to enter into the holiest place, into the presence of the Ark of the Covenant, that is, apart from the Kohen HaGadol, the high priest, who, just once a year, entered twice on one day. He would first enter with the blood of a young bull for atonement for himself and the transgressions of his family. Then, the second time he went in, he took the blood of a goat for the transgressions of Israel. Now that brings us to the 7th Moed, the final one, which is Sukkot, which is the last of the 3 fall festivals. Sukkot is also a period of remembrance. This time it is about the time that they spent in the wilderness, as verse 42 and 43 tell us. You are to live in Sukkot for 7 days. Every citizen of Israel is to live in a sukkah, so that your generation after generation, you will know that I made the people of Israel live in Sukkot when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh, your God. There are also 2 holy convocations during the celebration of Sukkot. One on the first day, and the other is on the 8th day, which I will consider in more detail during the celebration of Sukkot. And that ends the broad outline of all 7 Moedim. However, 3 of those 7, Matzah, Shavuot, and Sukkot, were also designated as agricultural festivals, when all men of Israel were to present themselves before Yahweh in the place where he would dwell, with a thanksgiving offering of all the produce that their land had produced during the 3 growing seasons. Now that brings me back to this evening and the observance of Yom Teruah, and particularly the part of verse 24 where it says, as a day for remembering. But as Yahweh did not say what Israel was to remember, nor do any other scriptures give us any clues, that phrase has remained a complete mystery to all of Israel right down to this very day. Even though it remained a mystery, it did not prevent the Jewish sages from finding an explanation of their own making that they could remember. They took it upon themselves during the Babylonian exile to reset their calendar to reflect the Babylonian year. During that exile, the sages changed the name of the fifth Moed from Yom Teruah to Rosh Hashanah, meaning the head of the year. The first day of the seventh month on the Aviv calendar became a direct reflection of the Babylonian agricultural cycle. Israel adopted the month name of Tishri as their new name for the scriptural seventh month. Those same changes remained throughout the Second Temple era and beyond, and they are still in use even today by the modern Jewish world. Along with the year beginning in the seventh month, Rosh Hashanah was celebrated for 2 days, where, in verse 24, it speaks quite clearly about it being just 1 day. The explanation given from Chabad, which is a well-respected authority on Jewish practices, gives the following reason. Rosh Hashanah is observed on the first and second days of Tishri. Even though the Torah ordains only 1 day, with the first day of Rosh Hashanah the only ever falling on the days of Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Shabbat. This regulation is an ordinance of the sages. Now, the second attempt to give some meaning to the otherwise unexplainable Moed of Yom Teruah was to claim that Rosh Hashanah was the birthday of the universe and the day which God created Adam and Eve. The third explanation they give was put forward by Ramban, Moses ben Naaman, in the 13th century Jewish sage, suggesting that the remembrance before God was needed because Rosh Hashanah inaugurated the 10-day period of judgment and repentance. These are just some of the wide-ranging explanations Rabbinical Judaism have placed upon the unexplainable words of verse 24. The same rabbinic understanding is still practiced in most synagogues throughout the world, even to this day. But is there a deeper and more concealed significance to Yom Teruah? As Talmidim of Yeshua, when we look back from this 21st century through the guidance of the Ruach HaKodesh, we can see there is a much greater significance behind the words about that fifth Moed, Yom Teruah. That deeper significance lies in the life, death, and resurrection of Yeshua, through which he completely fulfilled the first 3 Moedim. Then, just 50 days after his first ascent, when he went to the presence of his Father on the day of Bikurim in 30 CE, he poured forth the Ruach upon his chosen faithful, those emissaries who were at the temple, in the temple courts, for the celebration of Shavuot. However, just before his final ascension to the right hand of God, Yeshua told his Talmidim that he was going to prepare a place for them, and that he would return and gather them to him when his Father gave approval. Therefore, we can expect that Yeshua's return will occur on Yom Teruah. That is why there will be so much shouting, and a day of God's great shofar will sound. Just as Shaul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16, it will be just like it was at Mount Erev when the 10 words were given to Israel. The people at Mount Erev saw thick clouds, lightning, and they even heard the sound of God's shofar. But they did not know in advance what was happening. It was totally confusing to them and overwhelming. However, today, through the words of Shaul and Yeshua and the guidance of the Ruach, we know that when God's shofar sounds, it will be time for us to all be lifted up to meet Yeshua in the air. So it will certainly be a time of great joy and a time for shouting. Now, moving on, I said in my introduction this evening that during my Devar I would explain in more detail the wider significance of the words Yom Teruah. Well, let's take a few minutes to consider those Hebrew words, Yom Teruah. Firstly, it is a well-recognized fact that the Hebrew word Yom means day. But what about Teruah? Firstly, it is not mentioned even once in the chapter 23 of Leviticus. But we know from the words used, the significance of the fifth Moed is all about the blasts on the shofar. However, the other significant feature is that that day involved a great deal of shouting. There are many other verses throughout the Tanakh and the Hebrew word, where the Hebrew word Torah is referred to or used in the English. So let's look at 3 examples where the word Teruah, has been translated into shout or cry. Firstly, in 2 Samuel chapter 6 verse 15, when the ark was being brought into the city of David, we are told David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh with shouting and the sounds of the shofar. In Job chapter 8 verses 20 to 21, when one of Job's friends was making his challenge, he says, "Look, God will not reject a blameless man, nor will he uphold a wrongdoer. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy." Moving on to Ezra chapter 3 verse 11. After Yehuda had returned to Eretz Israel and they started laying the foundation of the new temple, there was a great deal of shouting to Yahweh, for he is good, for his grace continues forever towards Israel. All the people raised a shout of great joy and praise to Yahweh, because the foundations of the house of Yahweh were being laid. So in each of these 3 examples, the Hebrew word behind shouting or crying is Teruah. But when we look again at the words in Vayikra Chapter 23 verses 23 to 25, there is no mention of Teruah, shouting or crying. So where does the indication that the 5th Moed is a day for shouting or crying? That deeper significance is hidden behind the words of chapter 23. But we know that the first 4 Moedim were actually fulfilled by Yeshua himself during his time here on earth. The stages of his fulfillment were through his death at Pesach as the Pesach lamb. His resurrected body became the bread of life, the matzah. His presentation to his Father on Bikurim, he became the first fruits of the dead. His pouring out of the Ruach HaKodesh upon the chosen ones at Shavuot was confirmation of his departing gesture. So having fulfilled all 4 Moedim, there still remain 3 more yet to be fulfilled at his return and beyond. With the next one to be fulfilled, of course, is Yom Teruah. The next step, when Yeshua returns for his bride, will of course occur on Yom Teruah. But just which Yom Teruah? That's only the Father knows the answer to that question, not even Yeshua. As he was about to depart for the last time to sit at the right hand of the Father, He said to his 11 emissaries that he was going away, that he was not going to take the Roman yoke off their shoulders at that time. So when we look at Luke, what Luke said in Acts chapter 1 verses 6 through 8, we see them asking the question, Master, are you at this time going to restore self-rule to Israel? Yeshua answered, you don't need to know the date or the time. The Father has kept these under his authority. But you will receive power when the Ruach HaKodesh comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and in Yehuda and Shomron, and indeed to the ends of the earth. Now they did not realize at that stage, of course, that it would be nearly 2,000 years before his return. Even now, we still do not know when, but we do know that it will be sometime in the near future, because we are now less than 1 decade away from the end of that second millennium since he died. So as Yeshua said in Yochanan or John chapter 2 verse 19, at the time when he walked into the city, he said, destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up again. Not only was he speaking about his own body, but he was actually talking about the literal temple, because he was turning over the tables of the money changers and the merchants. And they were questioning him, what gives you the authority to do these things? And that's when he said what he did. So he was speaking about the temple itself. Then, of course, 40 years later, after his death, the actual temple was destroyed. And it has never been rebuilt. So Yeshua will rebuild it in the 3rd millennium. In Jeremiah chapter 31 verses 31 through 40, look, the days are coming, says Yahweh, when the city will be rebuilt, and it will never be uprooted or destroyed ever again. So that is the promise of what will occur in that 3rd millennium. So his return at Yom Teruah must take place before he can rebuild the city and the temple. Therefore, we need to remain vigilant and not be like those 5 bridesmaids in Matthew 25 verses 11 through 13, where it said, later, the other bridesmaids came. Sir, sir, they cried, let us in. But he answered, indeed, I tell you, I don't know you. So stay alert, and because you know neither the day nor the hour. Because Yeshua may return before the end of the 2nd millennium, we must be alert and vigilant and waiting. Now bear in mind that it's less than a decade to the end of that millennium. So coming back to the question I asked in my welcome to this evening, why are we observing Yom Teruah? I hope through what I've shared, it's gone some way towards explaining the reasons why we, as Talmidim of Yeshua, observe this evening of Yom Teruah. Amen.